Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Saturday, August 23rd, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, what we learned from released transcripts of interviews with Ghislaine Maxwell, plus a look at the GOP's preparations ahead of next year's midterms, and Gilmar Abrego Garcia has been released from custody. The Justice Department yesterday released transcripts of interviews Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche conducted last month with disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein's imprisoned former girlfriend and associate Ghislaine Maxwell when she absolved President Donald Trump of any wrongdoing. At one point, Maxwell said that the president was never inappropriate with anybody. Maxwell, who has been tried twice for perjury, was convicted in 2021 of conspiring with Epstein to sexually abuse minors. She has appealed her conviction and is angling for a possible pardon by Trump, with whom she interacted socially years ago. Trump has said that while he is allowed to pardon Maxwell, who's serving a 20-year sentence on sexual abuse charges, no one has asked him about it, and it would be inappropriate to discuss it. The Trump administration has been heavily criticized in recent weeks over its earlier refusal to release a massive collection of Epstein-related investigative records held by the Justice Department and FBI. How are President Donald Trump and the GOP preparing ahead of 2026 midterms? I spoke with USA Today White House reporter Zach Anderson for a closer look. Hi, Zach.
Hello.
So I just want to start here. What midterm strategy are we already seeing President Trump roll out?
Well, Trump has already talked about redrawing the congressional maps in states like Texas and other Republican-held states. He's put out a social media post where he talked about getting rid of mail-in voting through an executive order. So he's looking at a really bare-knuckle sort of power politics approach here to impact the districts, to impact the voting, and also really his team, the administration is encouraging Republicans to really rally behind his agenda. Vice President J.D. Vance was out on the trail this week trumpeting the president's signature policy initiative that doesn't poll very well right now, and Republicans are hoping to turn that around. But Trump is really doubling down on his aggressive agenda that he rolled out from the start of his second administration, really a sort of full-on MAGA embrace of everything that he's doing as he goes into the midterms.
So in terms of how Republican leaders are following suit, I know you were in Atlanta this week, Zach, speaking with some party leaders. What did you hear from them?
They really love what the president is doing. They're really happy with it. And they don't believe the polls that show that his approval rating is down and that parts of his agenda are unpopular. They think that he has a winning recipe for the midterms and that they can really sell it. They support the redistricting effort. Trump has really put his stamp on the party. It's a fully MAGA party now. I was at the Republican National Committee meeting. They elected a new chair who's a longtime Trump loyalist. He's really a true believer and is eager to tout the president's record. And so, yeah, they're really behind him 100%.
Was you right? Trump has used cultural issues to clearly drive a wedge between Democrats and the working class. Is that part of the ongoing Republican strategy going forward?
Absolutely. It's something that we saw in the last few election cycles where they focused on things like transgender participation in sports, a really aggressive immigration, criticizing so-called woke policies by Democrats. And that really is something that the Republicans I talked to think would continue to be a winning strategy and something that they emphasized about Trump's record.
He made gains with young people and minorities in 2024, clearly, Zach. Are Republicans expected to hold on to any of those gains, and how big a part of their strategy will this be?
There's been some polling that indicates some softening of support there. There was a Pew poll recently that showed that both with young people and with Hispanics, Trump's approval rating is below the vote share that he got in 2024. The party has tried to appeal more towards working class voters. They've tried to appeal to younger voters. Trump was going on all these podcasts, especially trying to appeal to younger men. And so I think that is going to be a continued effort there to reach out to those voters, but it looks like they might have some work to do.
And we should say, Trump, this will be his last term in office, but even just beyond helping the party, Zach, he has a lot to potentially benefit from personally, right? In keeping his party in power. How so?
Well, he really wants to have the second 2 years of his presidency just as aggressive as the first 2 years. If Democrats flip the House and get control of at least one of the congressional chambers, the Senate looks more difficult for them. They would have subpoena power. They can launch investigations of Trump. They can try and gum up the works with his agenda. And he doesn't want that. So, for his presidency and also for the party going forward and putting them in the best chance into heading into the next presidential cycle, they definitely want to maintain unified control of government and continue to enact a robust agenda, a very aggressive conservative agenda that has a lot of Democrats alarmed, and they're eager to push back here. So it's going to be a hard fought election. But some people have framed this as basically it could be the facto end of Trump's presidency, and not just Democrats, but Republicans are saying that. So they're really raising the stakes.
All right. Zach Anderson covers the White House for USA Today. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.
Gilmar Abrego Garcia was released from custody yesterday, more than 5 months after his arrest and illegal deportation. The 30-year-old Maryland man is now set to return to his wife and children as his deportation case continues in a court battle that spans multiple states and countries, even coming before the Supreme Court. His lawyers have sought to prevent him from being arrested once more by immigration officials. He was deported to his native El Salvador in March, despite a 2019 immigration court ruling that he not be sent there due to a risk of persecution by gangs. He was flown back to the U.S. in June to face criminal charges of transporting migrants living illegally in the country. Despite his release yesterday, he may not be out for long. Immigration officials could take him into custody and initiate deportation proceedings. Just like his brother before him this week, a California parole board has declined to give Lyle Menendez freedom. At yesterday's hearing, his repeated use of contraband cell phones over the years was cited. When asked why he felt like he needed a phone when he had an approved tablet to communicate with family, Lyle said that prison guards who monitored his communications for security sold them to tabloids. Before the board's decision, Lyle spoke of physical and sexual abuse at the hands of both his parents, but took responsibility for what he said was all this pain. Parole Commissioner Julie Garland said in the announcement of the denial that the board believes Lyle Menendez is sorry for the murders of his parents, but she said he still shows signs of antisocial behavior. A day earlier, the board ruled that his younger brother, Eric, was also not eligible for parole. California Board of Parole Hearings Commissioner Robert Barton said that he continued to pose an unreasonable risk to public safety. During his hearing, Eric acknowledged infractions ranging from writing personal letters on a work device and possessing contraband art supplies to physically fighting with other inmates and helping a prison gang with a tax scheme. He was denied parole for 3 years. Lyle will be considered for an administrative review within 1 year, and he could be moved up to a hearing as soon as 18 months. The brothers were convicted in 1996 of the slaying of their wealthy parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez. They were shot to death in their Beverly Hills home in 1989. Gender pronouns are at the forefront of a growing workplace conflict pitting religious beliefs against the rights of trans and non-binary people. I spoke with USA Today senior reporter Jessica Gwynn for more. Jessica, thanks for hopping on as always.
Hi, Taylor. Thanks for having me.
So let's just start by talking about Jocelyn Bowden and her story. What happened here?
Well, Jocelyn Bowden is an experienced retail manager from Utah. She had managed a Bath and Body Works store there for 3.5 years when she hired a transgender man as a retail associate. And during their first shift together, Bowden said she twice referred to the employee as she, because that's in keeping with her faith as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which she says teaches that gender is an immutable characteristic of a person's eternal identity. She says 2 other retail associates corrected her during that shift. So she told her manager that she was more than willing to use the employee's chosen name, not his gender pronouns. Ultimately, she was fired. Her termination notice cited that she had engaged in unwanted conduct directed at an individual based on their sex. But she says her termination was religious discrimination because she was never offered a reasonable accommodation. Bath and Body Works, of course, sees the situation somewhat differently. It says it's trying to create a workplace where everyone feels respected and valued, and that it does not discriminate against anyone based on any protected status. But what's interesting here is that Jocelyn Bowden is not alone. I have another case in the story in which an IKEA manager from Indiana said he was fired for not using a coworker's chosen gender pronouns, despite his request for a religious accommodation for his Christian beliefs. IKEA said it was just trying to create an inclusive workplace, but there's obviously a conflict here that is heating up.
Well, as you write, Jessica, there's a belief among many Americans that using someone's correct pronouns is common courtesy and not using them can be interpreted as discrimination. But what does the law actually say?
When there's a clash between someone's identity and someone's religious convictions, employers are caught in a catch-22. On the one hand, the Supreme Court extended federal workplace protections to LGBTQ plus employees in a 2020 ruling in which they sided with 3 employees who were fired because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. What's unclear from that ruling is whether it extends beyond hiring and firing to issues such as gender pronouns or bathrooms. On the other hand, the Supreme Court also broadened protections for religious workers and expanded the requirements employers must meet to accommodate their beliefs. Because of that ruling, an employer must show that the burden of granting a religious accommodation would result in undue hardship.
Jessica, why do trans people feel often unsafe at work?
Well, transgender and non binary employees are among the most vulnerable and marginalized groups in the workplace, and they face unusually high rates of on the job harassment and discrimination. Williams Institute a survey last year found that 82% of trans employees have reported experiencing discrimination and harassment in the workplace at some point in their lives. And that also holds true for nearly 6 in 10 non-binary employees. And LGBTQ plus advocates say the use of pronouns that align with a person's gender identity is an important signal of acceptance. But unfortunately, many of these workers are subjected to harassment by coworkers, bosses, customers who they say intentionally and persistently refer to them by the wrong pronouns.
Now, where is this conversation going next, Jessica?
We're seeing an increase in claims objecting to gender pronouns on religious grounds. Until the Supreme Court weighs in, I'm not sure we will get much clarity on what the rules of the road are. But with the shifting political and legal environment, employment lawyers are telling clients it's now unclear whether they have to accommodate an employee's personal pronouns. In the meantime, employers can and should continue to require employees to treat everyone, regardless of their sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, religious belief, or any other classification with respect. How does that work practically speaking? Lawyers are telling clients to engage in an interactive process to find a reasonable accommodation when an employee objects to using a coworker's pronouns on religious grounds. So I guess we'll just have to see how that goes.
All right. Jessica Gwynn is a senior reporter with USA Today. Folks can find the full version of the story with a link in today's show notes. Thank you, Jessica.
Thanks, Taylor.
And coming up tomorrow morning, Saul Blair has devoted years of his life to reclaiming family land purchased by his great-grandfather in the years after slavery. But the retired healthcare executive in Georgia has hit roadblocks as he works to hold on to the land, and his story is putting a spotlight on heirs' property rights. Over the course of the 20th century, Black Americans lost roughly 80% of the property they owned at the peak of ownership in the decades after the Civil War due to theft and systemic injustices.
Saul's been a little bit frustrated with some of the organizations that he reached out to. I hope I made that clear in the story. There's a lot of interest in the heirs property issue right now as a way of sort of trying to close the racial wealth gap.
That was USA Today reporter Andrea Riccier, who visited Saul on his Georgia property earlier this summer. I recently sat down with Andrea to get a better sense of how this hard-fought land was so easily lost and what avenues he might pursue to remedy the injustice. You can hear the full episode beginning at 5 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your pods. And as always, you can email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.